Hey, we in our book series of Acts, and man, we've just been moving through it quickly. Hopefully you guys have taken some time over these last few weeks. So we've been in the book of Acts and are reading through it. Today we're gonna jump into chapters 11 and 12. And man, there's no way for me, at least there's no way for me in 32 minutes to teach these two chapters to you. So make sure you take some time today and this week, read through the chapter and just get something in you. But together, let's go to Acts 11, verse 19. We're gonna start there, Acts 11, 19. Thank you, my man. If I stay seated, hopefully I could teach a little bit. We'll see, but that's the goal. And listen, quickly, in Acts, man, these chapters are so gold, but it starts, actually, I'm not gonna touch it because my dad was teaching a little bit on it last week, and so he kind of highlighted this, but the beginning of chapter 11, it starts with the apostles mad at Peter because Gentiles got saved, and Peter sharing a vision. I love this line, he says, "Who am I to withstand God?" Man, that's a good story. Who am I to withstand God? And so it starts with them, and then they start celebrating the idea of Gentiles being saved. Goes on, there's persecution. The persecution launches. I'm not to that verse yet. They threw it. I asked for it too soon. The persecution launches, scatters the message in Acts 11, 19, which we're going to come back to in just a second. It goes on in Acts 26, 11, 26, where the disciples were first called Christians in Antioch. There's so much stuff in these chapters. I'm not even gonna touch today the idea of the first time the word Christian was used in the book of Acts, ever. In history, the first time Christian is used is right here in chapter 11 of Acts. It goes on in Acts 12, the beginning of it, Herod kills James and arrests Peter. Later in the chapter, Peter is let out of prison by an angel. I mean, these two chapters are just so dense and so rich. But go back with me to Acts 11, verse 19. And it says, "Meanwhile, the believers who had been scattered during the persecution after Stephen's death traveled as far as Phoenicia, Cyprus, Antioch, and Syria. They preached the word of God, but only to Jews. However, some of the believers who went to Antioch from Cyprus and Cyrene began preaching to the Gentiles about the Lord Jesus. The power of the Lord was with them, and a large number of these Gentile believers turned to the Lord." This is amazing to me. Up until this point in Acts, there have been a few stories where individual believers or individual households of Gentiles had come to Jesus. The story of Cornelius, where Peter goes to the house and the Spirit falls. Or the story of Philip, where he's talking to the eunuch that worked in the queen's palace and how he was saved in that moment. But outside of those few stories, they hadn't preached the message of Jesus to Gentiles. Now, you want to know why that's such a big deal to us? Because we're Gentiles. It's us. The message was still only being communicated to Jewish people. Now, pause and think for a sec. Jesus leads his disciples, the apostles, for 3 years, and then he is crucified, he comes back to life, he lives with them for a few weeks, he gathers them on a mountaintop, he says, "Listen, wait for my Spirit to be poured out on you on the day of Pentecost." Side note, today is Pentecost Sunday. How cool is that? And so, yeah, really fun Sunday. And so on the day, he goes, "Wait for my Spirit to be poured out, and then take my message to every tribe, to every tongue, to all mankind, to everyone." And his disciples were like, "Cool, so you want us to preach to the Jews?" He's like, no, I want you to preach to everyone. He's like, "Cool, so the Jews?" Like, no, to everyone teach my message. Like, yeah, we're just gonna stick with the Jews, I think. I mean, it's crazy that all up until this part of the story, for the most part, only Jewish people were hearing the message of Jesus. The big deal for us is if that had stayed true, we would have never heard the message of Jesus. You would still not be able to go to heaven if it hadn't been for this moment in the story in Acts. You wouldn't have heard the message of Jesus. You wouldn't be saved from your sins. Your name wouldn't be written in the Lamb's Book of Life. You would not be dying and going to heaven with Jesus had this not happened. And here's the crazy part of it. It says, some believers from Cyprus and Cyrene. Cyprus is a little Mediterranean island, and Cyrene is northern Africa. So not from Jerusalem, not from where Jesus was, not from Nazareth or Bethlehem or Galilee. No, from an island and from North Africa. Some believers that had heard about Jesus go to Antioch and just start preaching to Gentiles. First point today is what could happen if you didn't need credit. What could happen if you didn't need any credit? These people that started the church that we're still fruit of are nameless in the New Testament. It just says some believers, not Peter, not Paul, not Barnabas, not James, not an apostle, just some believers. That's it. Luke, who wrote the book of Acts, he ain't giving me nothing else. Now, guys, let's remember that Luke is a historian. He's a doctor, he's a physician, and he's writing this account of Acts for us. This man had the ability to research, because half of the book he wasn't a part of. Half the book he just researched. The back half of the book of Acts, Luke was a part of it. So he's writing in first person. In a few chapters, we're going to get to that part of the story. But up until this part of the story, he's just researching and finding out what happened and then accumulating it into a story. And earlier in the story, he logs that Saul, who becomes Paul, was standing in front of Stephen with coats laid in front of his feet as they stoned Stephen to death. How in the world can Luke get that detail, but he couldn't track down the names of the people that started the church for the Gentiles? This is crazy to me. Somehow, it wasn't an apostle. It wasn't a disciple. It wasn't a deacon. There wasn't a bishop in sight, and the church for us was started. For you. The church for you was started by someone that was called some believers. Who? Some. Was it two? This is some. Was it 5 of them? It was like some. Was it 1? It was like some. We don't know. It was just someone started it. But we do know that they came from an island in the Mediterranean and from North Africa. We know that they were in essence, we know that they weren't from the Mecca. They weren't from Jerusalem. They weren't from where Jesus came from. They weren't where the disciples came from. They were just people that heard about Jesus and were like, we are so on fire for him, we don't need credit to spread his message, to spread his love, his kind. We just want to reach people for Jesus. What could happen in the Northwest if we were just so committed to just reaching people for Jesus and we didn't need our name on it? At the base of Christianity, it's a heart of service. There's a servant's heart at the root of Christianity. Jesus exemplified that. Jesus modeled that. Jesus taught that. He over and over, he would say, you got to be, the greatest of all is the servant. The first will be last. Like, you got to serve. He washed his disciples' feet. He was showing them, this is how I want you to live, serving others. If you struggle with the idea that you need credit, that you need to be seen, if you struggle with the idea that you're entitled to something, that you're owed something, that you should be given something, if you struggle with that idea that something needs to come to you, then you'll always struggle with Christianity, because at its core, Christianity is serving, not receiving. You catching this? See, if you think, well, yeah, but you don't know, I'm owed this. You know what? You could be right, and yet you'll still struggle. You could be correct. You probably could be owed something. Someone could have taken that from you or owed that to you. Or I'm not saying you're wrong. I am saying, though, that you'll struggle with Christianity. Because Jesus was owed everything and came giving it all. So we follow someone who was entitled to the planet and gave his life. Has anyone ever been entitled to more than Jesus? This man, in his humility, came as a baby, and he didn't pick royalty. He picked a virgin girl that had nothing to her name. He lived a life that was overlooked, that was average, that was minimum, and he gave, and he gave. And this is the man that created the sun but showed up as a baby. This is the man that created the galaxies but showed up as an infant. This is the man that gave you breath, that knows the details of your hair and how the eyeball formed and how you breathe in and breathe out. He created the planet to function on its own. And somehow in all of that showed up and served and died for us. So if we struggle with the idea that we should be receiving and not giving while you could be right, you're gonna be a bad Christian. You're gonna struggle following Jesus. You're gonna really struggle with this idea of what it means to be a Jesus follower, a Jesus person. You're gonna struggle looking like Jesus, talking like Jesus, acting like Jesus, following Jesus. Because in the midst of being owed, he never took, he always gave. Just like these people that started the church that we're a part of today. We don't even know their names. No one tagged them in their quote, in their tweet. No one put them on Instagram for their story because, man, look at these people. They just changed the world over here. They turned this city on fire for Jesus. They got none of that. Who started the revival? I don't know. Who started it? I don't know. Who's the leader? We don't know. Someone just showed up and started preaching Jesus. We're all about it now. Nameless. Peter ain't in sight. James ain't in sight. Paul ain't in sight. Barnabas, none of them. None of the names in the New Testament are there. It's just some believers from an island in Africa showed up and changed the world. Changed the world. If we could live our lives. Now, I'm not saying that you won't get credit, because God loves to celebrate you. He loves to make the Davids overcome Goliath. He loves to celebrate the Daniel and the lions. And he loves the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the midst of the fire. So don't hear what I'm not saying. He's going to love to bless your sacrifice and love to bless your serving and he's going to love to bless you. But the heart of it is, I'm just here to serve. I'm here to give. I'm here to just do what I can to advance the message of Jesus. If my name is on it or not, it does not matter, because I'm a servant like my Savior. Whether my name is on it or not, it don't matter to me. Just some believers. They changed the world. What could happen if we, Christian faith, decide we don't care who gets the credit, we just want the whole Northwest to be saved? We just want people getting baptized. We want people walking in the Spirit. We want people walking in blessing and freedom and hope. It does not matter to me who gets the credit as long as they get to eternity with Jesus. If we could just be a light in the darkness, my light, your light, our light, let's just put it together and shine brighter for Jesus. We'll struggle if we're always trying to receive when we're called to give. Go with me to Acts 11, same chapter, verse 22. Just a little on in this same story. It says that when the church at Jerusalem heard what had happened, they sent Barnabas up to Antioch. So the church in Jerusalem is hearing about all of these Gentiles coming to Jesus, and they send a leader. They go, we got to get Barnabas up here and see what's going on. When he arrives and saw the evidence of God's blessing, he was filled with joy. And he encouraged the believers to stay true to the Lord. Barnabas was a good man, full of the Holy Spirit and strong in faith. And many people were brought to the Lord. Then Barnabas went on to Tarsus to look for Saul. When he found him, he brought him back to Antioch. Both of them stayed with the church for a full year. I love this, and I want to unpack this for us and dig into this little sliver of that Bible gives us. It says that they send Barnabas up. Go check this out. What's going on up in this area? What's all going on in Antioch? Now, Antioch was the third most important, the third largest, the third strongest metropolitan area in the Roman providence. So Rome had taken over. Rome was the power of the world, and Antioch was its third biggest and best city. But it was a combination of a lot of culture, a lot of ethnicity, a lot of people. It was advanced, and they're like, wait, all of these Gentiles in Antioch, the third largest city in the known power of the world, are turning to Jesus. We better figure out what's going on up in Antioch. They send Barnabas up. Barnabas gets there. He has no idea who's the leaders. They don't know who the leaders are. Some people from Africa and the island, they just showed up, got us saved, and we're all about it. So Barnabas brings a little order, but he's loving and he's compassionate. He's full of the Spirit. And then it hits him. I'm not the leader that y'all need, but I know a guy. I got to go get someone. Let me go get someone real quick. Now, Tarsus was about 150-ish miles away from Antioch, and he had to go over a mountain range. So this man's like, it's a short jog. It's about 150 miles over the mountain pass. I'll be back in a few weeks. He had already come from Jerusalem, which was over 200 miles away. This man's putting miles in for people. He's just huffing. He's like, I've been walking for a year. Listen, Forrest Gump over here is like, I just started walking. I'm just going to go find Paul now. You think about that for a minute. These missionary trips, these jokers just walked. You have a hard time making it to life group because there's traffic. That low, wasn't it? I didn't say that at the first or the second, but you guys, I don't know, I'm really tired and it's just the Spirit right now. I've been pouring out all day. I'm tired right now. I'm 3 services in and exhausted. And y'all, my bad. I didn't mean to uppercut you. But, some people do whine about, traffic for life groups. And Barnabas walked a few hundred miles for Jesus. So, what have you done? And, and this man is walking. He gets to Antioch. He's like, wait, he leads. He's like, but I'm not the right guy. I got to go get Paul. But back up a little bit. I got to give you context in this. So 2 chapters earlier in Acts 9, we see Paul last. That's the last time we hear of Paul was 2 chapters earlier. And Paul, remember, he was on the road. He sees Jesus, a blinding light. Jesus leaves and he's left blind. He's led by the hand into the city. Ananias comes to him, says, Brother Saul, prays for him. He says, scales fall from his eyes. Paul goes on fire for Jesus, preaching the message of Christ. Fast forward a few verses, and the Jewish people hate this idea of Paul's conversion and try to kill him. Word gets out about the plan, and they sneak Paul out of town through the gate. No one knows, they sneak him out. Okay, now that's only 2 chapters ago. However, it's 9 years between chapters 9 and chapter 11 for Paul. So you just read 2 chapters, like you read that in a day. That's like your Bible reading plan. Like you might have read that on the same morning. However, for Paul, he has been waiting for God to use him for 9 years. Guys, if you got saved, Jesus shows up in the flesh, blinding light, and you're like, Lord, I'm so sorry. I'll turn from my ways. I'll follow you. I'm all in. You go, he scales fall from your eyes, and you're like no longer blind. After being blind for 3 days, you're like, I will follow you, and he starts preaching. And they're like, we got to get you out of Dodge because they're trying to kill you. He goes back to Tarsus, where he was from, and 9 years pass. I'm getting antsy at like year half. Like half a year, 6 months in, I'm like, let's go, God. I'm ready. 1 year, I'm like, God, hello. I'm still here. 2 years, I'm like, honestly, I don't know if any of us have the guts, have the determination, have the willpower to wait 9 years in a season of obscurity. I mean, if we just read 2 chapters, we moved on as our daily reading plan. We just read it. No, Paul was living for years. Years. 9 years since we last hear of Paul. And Barnabas is like, I know a guy. He's right. He's close. He's a few hundred miles away. I'm going to go get him. How does Barnabas know Paul's ready? How does he know he's still there? How does he know he still believes in Jesus? How does he know he's willing and ready? Because he's following God. See, you ever played the dominoes where you set them up in a line and you hit the first one and then like they all just start falling over and like people make like cool designs of them and it's so intricate what some of those people can build with them dominoes. Anyone ever done that before? I don't have the patience, but it looks awesome. But what happens when you take one out of the middle? Like it stops there. Because it was developed, it was designed, it was created to continue. But every piece matters just as much as the one before it and the one after it. And I can't get to the one after it if the one before it bailed. Just like dominoes, we're in the plans and the purpose of God. And there's a plan on your life. There's a purpose on your life. And God sees the whole picture. And your picture might take 9 years of obscurity, 9 years of waiting. It might take 9 years of preparation. It might take 9 years of digging into the depths of who you are to make sure that the character on the inside can carry the weight of the outside. You don't know what's coming, but God does. But if you get out of line, if you bail on God, if you quit on your calling, if you say, I'm no longer willing to wait, I'm no longer willing to prepare, I'm no longer willing to allow God to do what he's called me to do, if you get out, you just don't know what might not happen. See, there was some random dominoes at the beginning of this story, so random that it just calls them some believers. But it was these some believers that started this domino effect. But maybe it wasn't. Maybe the story goes a little further back than that, because you see, we know in the story that he goes to get Saul, who we later know and call Paul in the New Testament. The nuance is one of them is a Roman name, one of them is a Hebrew name, but it's the same person that they're referring to. Just a little side note, I believe he starts referring to himself as Paul, not Saul, because it's his Roman name and he felt called of God to reach Gentile people. So he gave up his identity as a Jew because he was called to reach Gentiles. He goes, I need you to identify me the way I've been called of God. I'm called of God to reach these people, so call me the name that identifies with them the best. That's neither here nor there, and there's a few other opinions in there. Either way, we do know that his name was Saul and it was converted to Paul. And we know that they went out and brought him back. Barnabas gets him, brings him back, says, you're called to lead this. But maybe that's not the beginning of the dominoes, because if you back up to the beginning of the chapter of 11, which we already read, it says, meanwhile, the believers who had been scattered, why were they scattered? Because of the persecution of Stephen's death. So the believers are in Antioch because Stephen was martyred. Who martyred Stephen? Saul. It says it was Saul that was standing at the front with the coats laid at his feet. It says that he was the authority that was overseeing what had happened. He was the one saying, go ahead. I approve this. I condone this. This is legal. This is accepted. This is right in the sight of God. This young man who was on fire for Jesus was martyred at Saul's behalf. Fast forward, y'all, the Bible is crazy. The plans of God on your life are so intricate. Sometimes you just got to trust when they don't make sense. You fast forward and Barnabas is like, I know a guy that's called to lead this movement, but this movement only exists because there was a scatter in Jerusalem. The only reason they're here is because Stephen was killed and persecution was rampant, and there was this one guy named Saul that was persecuting people, but now that's the same guy I need to lead this movement, but this movement only exists because of his hate. Guys, can you understand that God used Saul on one day to start a movement that he would later lead? They're only there witnessing to the Antioch Gentiles because they were running from Jerusalem. And they were running because of Saul. 9 years go by, and Saul's the very person Barnabas gets to lead the movement. If you don't think God in his sovereignty can take your mess, oh my goodness. But I failed. Yeah, let God use that. But I messed up. Let God use that. But I struggled. Let God use that. But I was addicted. Well, if only God would use that. But I was a bum. I was a drug addict. I've been divorced. Oh, if only God could just use your mess. Church, he took Saul, who was a murderer, and 9 years later, put him right back in the domino. Boop. Yeah, I just visualize this. Paul starts the dominoes with his hate, with his aggression, with his murder, with his persecution, and all these dominoes start falling. And then God, he's like, but I got more for you, Paul, because I'm gonna put you back in the dominoes, the ones that you started. Yeah, you're gonna be the future domino that leads the movement that you just started. You thought you hated it. You thought you were coming at me. Oh, but when you put yourself in the hands of God, you just don't know what's coming. You just don't know his plans. You just don't know his ways. You just don't know what he could do. Even if you failed, he could do something with it. But it's not just a domino. Because dominoes, they fall over just one time. You're not just one moment and then that's all God had me for. I like the idea of batons because it's a team. Someone's got to run to the next one. There's a pass. I'll do what I'm called to do, but once I'm done with what I'm called to do, then it gets to you where you're called to do something else. And now you do what you're called to do. You run your race. You reach the people you're called to. You build what you obey God in your race, and it's not done. Then there's still another person. It's a domino, but you keep running it. And if you don't run your race, then the next person won't get the baton that they're waiting on. The domino will stop if you don't run your course. And I just think I look at the life of Paul. He was waiting for 9 years. Waiting for his next baton. God, use me, God. Yeah, you're good. Now, God, give me something. Just wait on me. And too many of us are too hasty. We won't wait. Our patience, we're not. The fruit of the Spirit is to long suffering. It's like this endurance in the wait. But God, if you forgot about me, just keep waiting because I'm doing something on the inside of you that I'm going to need to make sure that it's there once the blessing shows up, once the notoriety shows up, once the light shows up. You won't be able to handle what I'm calling you to if you can't endure this season. If you can't wait 9, you can't do what I'm calling you to. There is a preparation that's happening. There's a sculpting that's happening. There's a molding that's happening. And when no one else sees, something is happening on the inside. But if you're unwilling for God to mold the inside, you won't have the strength on the outside. And Paul is just waiting. And then Barnabas shows up and he's like, I got something. He's like, say less, give it to me. Where are we going? He's like, Antioch, I'm in. Let's go to Antioch. I've been waiting for a decade. But many of us take it on our own to figure it out. I've been waiting for 2 years. But you just won't trust God in the waiting. in the interim, in that season that you wouldn't have written into your story, something showed up out of nowhere. That health crisis, that financial crisis, that move, that friend, that family, something showed up in your life, and there was a season that it was a blow to your, it just knocked you out, knocked the air out of your life, it knocked the wind out of you, it just felt like it just left you high and dry. Like, I'll just make it on my own, I'll figure it out on my own, I'll overcome on my own. And God is like, if you would just keep trusting me in the waiting, someone is running your way. But it's not just Paul waiting. It was Barnabas. He had the faith. He had to have the guts to say, I know a guy that got saved a decade ago, and he hated Christians, and he was killing Christians, and he was murdering Christians, and he was creating. In fact, it's his fault that we got where we are today. He created this persecution, but I bet he's the right guy for this call. See, while you're running your race, be careful you don't start judging the people you're called to. What happens if you misjudge who you're called to witness to? What happens if you misjudge who you're called to love? What happens if you misjudge who you're called to lead? See, what happens if Barnabas misjudged Paul and never went and got him? What happens to the missions, to the church plants, to half of the New Testament that Paul wrote? What happens to that if Barnabas doesn't carry that baton and say, it's time, Paul, let's roll. But it's not just one, because I think sometimes we get stuck on what's my call, God, what's my one call? You don't ever feel that way? I get that question. You guys are liars, because that's like the number one question I get. What's my call? What's the one thing God has for me? I feel that energy. I still struggle with that sometimes. Am I perfect? Am I right where you want me, God? And honestly, half of us we would do it if we had the clarity. If God would just tell me, thus saith the Lord, do this, I'm like, down, I'm in, let's do that. But it's that uncertainty that drives us, but it's the uncertainty that establishes your faith so often. But it's not just one. All of us have many batons that we're running with. We run with many. It's not just one call on your life. And I've run my race. It wasn't like Barnabas went and got Saul and then he was done. No, he still had more things to do, more people to reach, more churches to plant, more people to disciple. He wasn't like, once I give Paul my one baton, then I'm done with God. Now I can retire. I think back to my dad was mentioning him last week, Julius, who was the director of the drug rehab program that my dad went to when he was 19, when he found Jesus and got saved. This man starts a rehab. He sees my dad, a 19-year-old strung out kid, scrawny, doped up, not a lot of hope, not a lot of promise, someone that most of us could have overlooked, so could have devalued. Why? Because on the outside, he didn't look like he had a lot to give. On the outside, it looks like maybe I should spend my time with someone else, invest in someone else. Maybe someone else has more promise. Someone else probably has more hope. Someone else probably has more to give back to me. I'm gonna invest in someone that has a better ROI. That person doesn't have a really good looking ROI. That person looks like it's just gonna relapse. Just a waste of my time. But Julius sees my dad, invests, loves, serves, mentors. I only have a few photos with him. I was a baby in all of them. But he gave my dad a baton. But it didn't stop there. Because that baton that Julius held, now I get to hold. Because the domino had to start, and someone had to receive it, and someone had it to keep it going. And I'm telling you, church, there has been seasons where no one thought, they were like, that kid fumbled the bag, he dropped the baton. It's done. It was a good run. But God in his mercy can put them dominoes back together. He'll give you, in the race, you can't fumble the transition. You drop that baton, you out. You miss your little moment, you're out. You don't pass at the right time, you're out. No, but God's like, I'll make you a new moment. I got new grace for you. But it's not just Julius' baton. You see, my dad isn't just running with one baton. And it's not just for me. He's got ones that he's been running and he's been trying to give you for years. And hundreds and hundreds of us have been inspired and motivated and called and challenged, and we've stepped into faith and we've stepped into calling because he's walked up to all of us and said, carry the baton that God has for you. And he's been that domino that started you on your mission and started you on your calling, and he's just doing his part. And then you're that person. You don't just have one baton either. You have more in your hands, and you got a baton for your calling and your parenting, and you got a baton in your marriage, and you got a baton for those boys that you're developing and leading and guiding and mentoring and being a big brother. Why? Because we have more than just one. And too many of us are just waiting for what's the one thing I'm called to do. God's like, one? One? Oh, I got more than just one thing for you, bro. You better be open-handed when you come to me, because I got a lot of stuff to throw at you. And you're not done when one thing passes. Just because one domino falls doesn't mean I'm done with you. I'm going to pick you back up and put you in the future. I'm going to keep using you. You got more, and as long as you stay submitted and planted to my will, God will keep developing and growing and flowing out of your life in ways you could have never dreamed or imagined. Because there's more. And you just don't know the generations that will be impacted by your willingness to carry and pass. If you stay faithful to God, if you stay obedient to God, you just don't know the dominoes that are coming from your obedience. Don't be the person that gets out of line, that stops following, that gets short. Don't be the person that quits because it just took too long. My season was too long. God left me. I'm just ready. No, be the person that stays in your place and trust that God sees you. He's like people say, God's never early, but he ain't late either. He feels late sometimes. He feels like, do you see me? Is it ever gonna come? But man, am I grateful that Paul had the courage, the guts to wait 9 years. Because Antioch became the base of Christianity. It moved from Jerusalem up to Antioch, and that was where Paul's missions were launched out of. How in the world did that happen? Because he trusted God, because he waited on God. Here, the band could come onto the stage. I got one more verse I want to read to you. Acts 12, verse 17. Now, that pivots the story a little bit from Antioch and Paul and Barnabas, and it goes back to Jerusalem, and it focuses on Peter for a second here. And they arrest James and Peter. James and Peter, 2 of the 12 disciples of Jesus. They arrest them both, and Herod, who's the ruler of the Jewish nation at that time, kills James. And after he murders James, or James becomes a martyr, he gets all of this positive attention from the Jewish group that wasn't following Jesus. The same group that killed Jesus, the same group that had him crucified. He feels so excited about killing James that he goes and arrests Peter. He's like, I'm gonna kill Peter too, because they loved it. Peter's under arrest, and it says that if you read it in the story in the Bible, that he's chained with both hands to groups of soldiers. He wasn't taking no chance. Both hands were chained not to one person each, but to a group of soldiers. And they were they were cycling them through. Every few hours, a new group would come and watch them. In the middle of the night, an angel leads Peter out of the prison. And we pick up right here, it says, he motions to them to be quiet and told them how the Lord had led him out of the prison. And he says in Acts 12:17, tell James and the other brethren what happened. I gotta give you a little more context. Peter gets out of jail, out of prison, goes to the house where they're all waiting for him. They're praying for him. They're interceding. They're fasting. God, save Peter, because they know that the next day he's going to get martyred. An angel takes him out of the prison, just frees his chains, walks out. He knocks on the door. He's like, I'm here. I got saved. I don't know how the doors just opened, the prison. I'm just here. And he says, listen, would you go tell the rest of the disciples, but tell James. Now, James is the younger brother of Jesus. And at this point in history, James had actually become the leader of the church of Jerusalem. He was the head of the council. He had gone from when Jesus was alive, he didn't follow. He wasn't a believer. He wasn't a disciple. In fact, multiple times, James was extremely critical of Jesus when he was alive. Criticized Jesus, spoke down to Jesus, belittled Jesus. Think about this for a moment. James, the brother of Jesus, who literally never saw his brother make a single mistake. He was sinless. He watched this man raise dead men to life. He watched him open blind eyes and deaf ears. He watched him perform miracles of bread and fish, feeding 5,000 men plus women and children. He watched him perform miracles where water was turned to wine for a party. He watched this man, his older brother, cast demons out of people. He heard stories that he walked on water and silenced the storms. And yet, through all of that, he never believed. He was standing outside of a house when a crippled man was lowered and he walked out with his bed. How could he watch his own older brother literally raise men from the dead, but still not believe? And then we see in this moment that now he's the actual leader of the church. You see, he couldn't believe Jesus when it was words, but when he saw the cross, it changed his whole perspective. And same is true in your life. There will be people in your life that struggle to believe when they hear what you have to say, but they will start believing when they see how you live through the biggest storms of your life. Church, don't drop your baton when life gets hard. Because it's in that struggle, it's in that storm that may be the very thing God's trying to use to save that one person that just hasn't believed yet. The same way it was the greatest storm Jesus ever went through that saved his brother, it might be the biggest storm you ever go through that saves yours. Many people will come to Jesus not by the words you say, but by the life you live. And not just the life you live, but the way you live in your worst moments. It's in the midst of your storms that might speak the loudest to the unbeliever. James, the leader of the church, submitted and followed his older brother, not because of the raising of the dead and the feeding of the masses, but because of the way he handled his storms. Same for you. People are going to come to Jesus, not always because of what you say, but because of how you live when life gets hard. Stay trusting God and know that he has a plan and that he has a purpose, and that as long as you're trusting him, that domino is in the perfect position for what he's called you to. With every head bowed and every eye closed,